You know how people say some houses have a soul? I used to think that was just something folks said in small towns to sound poetic. But after what happened, I don't laugh about that anymore. We had just bought this old house in a quiet town up north, one of those places where nothing ever happens. Tree-lined streets, neighbors who wave, kids on bikes. The kind of place you dream about raising a family in. The house itself was beautiful, over 100 years old, tall windows, creaking floors, a porch that wrapped all the way around. I remember standing there with my wife the first time we saw it and saying, "Feels like it's waiting for us." Turns out maybe it was, just not in the way I thought. The night it began, I'd stopped by alone to check on the contractors. It was late, maybe 10 o'clock. I walked through the empty rooms, heard the echo of my footsteps on the bare wood floors, and thought about how, in a few weeks, our kids' laughter would fill the place. Before I left, I opened the mailbox. There was one envelope inside, no return address, just neat handwriting on the front. To the new owners. I didn't think much of it. Maybe a neighbor welcoming us. I opened it right there under the porch light. The first line said, "Dear new neighbor, welcome to your home." Okay, friendly enough. But the next line stopped me cold. My family has watched this house for generations. It is now my turn. I remember reading that twice because I thought I'd misunderstood. Then it went on, talking about how the house had called us and asking, "Do you know what lies within its walls?" It mentioned details no one could have known, that we were repainting the rooms, that we'd brought in certain furniture, even the make of our car, which was parked in the driveway behind the house. The letter ended with a single line that chilled me more than anything. "Have they found what's in the walls yet?" I stood there staring at that envelope while the night around me seemed to get darker. You know that feeling? When your body knows something's wrong before your mind catches up? That's what it was like. I walked through the house again, room by room, turning on every light. I checked closets, the basement, even the attic, empty. But I swear, standing in the living room, I could feel eyes on me. The police came. The officer looked the letter over and said, "Probably just a prank." But he didn't sound convinced. A few days later, another letter arrived. This time, my wife found it. "The house is unhappy with the changes you're making," it said. "I see your children. I count 3. Are there more on the way? I will call them by name soon." That line broke her. We hadn't even let the kids play outside yet. So whoever wrote it was watching. We asked around, neighbors, the post office, the previous owners. Someone finally admitted they'd gotten a strange letter too, right before selling the house. They thought it was just some local crank and threw it away. The police ran forensics. Nothing. No fingerprints, no DNA. The postmark was from the next town over. Whoever it was knew exactly what they were doing, and the letters kept coming. They started talking about young blood, about how the house had a spirit, and how it hungered. "I am pleased to know the names of the young blood you have brought me," one said. "Have you found all the secrets in the walls?" We hadn't even moved in yet, and already the place felt tainted. We started seeing things, or maybe imagining them. A curtain shifting across the street, a car that parked a little too long at the corner, footsteps on the porch that vanished before we could look. Eventually we stopped going. We'd drive past it sometimes, and the kids would ask, "When can we move into the big house?" And we'd just say, "Soon." But soon never came. Months passed. The investigation hit dead ends. We couldn't sleep. We couldn't think about anything else. The house sat there, empty, its dark windows staring back at us every time we drove by. It started to feel alive in the worst way. Years later, we finally sold it, for much less than we'd paid. I handed over the keys, half relieved, half guilty. I wanted to warn the new owners, but what could I say? "Watch your mailbox?" They moved in, and they've never received a single letter. Sometimes I drive past that house. I tell myself I'm over it, but I always slow down. The porch light glows, the curtains move, the new owners sit out front with their kids smiling. And for a moment, I almost believe it's over. But then I remember the last letter we ever got. It said, "You'll never truly leave. The house remembers you." And every time I pass by, I swear, the lights flicker, just once, like it's saying hello.
I used to think that fear was something that happened in the dark, that if you just kept the lights on, locked the doors, you'd be fine. But I learned the hard way that sometimes the light doesn't protect you. It just lets you see what's really there. It started the winter after I moved into a small rental house. Just me, a couch, and a boxy old TV that picked up maybe 5 channels. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, cheap, and surrounded by woods. The landlord said the place had been empty for a few years. At first, it was peaceful. No traffic, no neighbors playing loud music, just the wind through the trees, the ticking of the baseboard heater, the occasional thump of snow sliding off the roof. But after a few weeks, that quiet started to feel too quiet. It was like the woods had gone still. Even the birds had stopped coming around. One night, I was sitting in the living room, half asleep in front of some late-night movie, when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping on the window. It wasn't loud, more like the sound of someone gently drumming their fingers on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. I muted the TV. Nothing. I told myself it was probably a branch in the wind, or a raccoon. Still, I got up and peeked through the curtain. Nobody there. But the snow outside was smooth and untouched. No footprints, no broken branches. I locked the door again, turned up the heat, and tried to put it out of my mind. The next night, it happened again. This time, I knew it wasn't the wind. The tapping came from the side window, the one right next to my couch. I froze. The sound was slow, deliberate, like someone was doing it just to get my attention. When I finally worked up the nerve to look, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A handprint, faint but clear. 5 long fingers pressed into the frost from the outside. The hand was too big to be mine. After that, I barely slept. I nailed blankets over the windows. I left the lights on all night. Still, every night, around the same time, the tapping started again. Always on a different window. Always gentle. Always patient. I called the sheriff's office. They came out, looked around, and found nothing. No footprints, no sign of anyone, one of them said. He gave me that look, the one people give when they're polite but don't believe you. I started to think maybe I was losing it. Sleep deprivation, stress, maybe even mice in the walls. But then, one night, I found proof. I'd set my phone up on the windowsill to record, facing outward. If someone was there, I'd see them. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting. And sure enough, the tapping started. Slow, precise, like fingernails on the glass. I let it go on for almost a minute before I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted up, turned on all the lights, grabbed my phone, and stopped the recording. I didn't even watch it right away. I was shaking too hard. But when I finally played it back, my blood ran cold. The video showed the empty yard, snow drifting softly under the porch light. Then suddenly, something moved past the edge of the frame. A shape. Someone standing just beyond the light. You could barely see his face, just a pale blur, half hidden in the dark. But his arm lifted, and you could see his hand tap the glass. 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. Then, as if he knew the camera was there, he leaned forward and smiled. I dropped the phone. By the time I grabbed my keys and ran to my truck, there was no one outside. I drove straight to a friend's house and stayed there for a week. When I finally went back, the landlord was there, waiting. He looked pale. said he'd found something I should see. He took me around to the back of the house, to the small window facing the woods. Right under it, in the snow, were deep, heavy footprints. But they didn't lead to the house. They led away, and they went straight into the woods, disappearing where the trees started. The landlord said, almost whispering, "That window's the only one that doesn't lock." I moved out the next morning. That was years ago. I still have the video. I can't bring myself to delete it. Sometimes I play it on my phone, just to remind myself it really happened. And every time I watch it, I notice something new. The last few seconds, right before the video cuts off, in the reflection of the glass, you can see me, asleep on the couch inside, and standing behind me, just barely visible, is a second figure. Closer watching.
I used to drive long hauls for work, alone, mostly at night. People say it's peaceful, that empty highways feel like freedom. But after a few years, you start realizing how fragile that peace really is. When it's just you, a dark road, and 1,000 miles of nothing, every small sound feels wrong. This story happened somewhere between winter and spring, when the nights were still long and the snow hadn't fully melted. I'd been on the road almost 12 hours, hauling equipment through the mountains. No traffic, no lights, just winding roads and the hum of the tires. To stay awake, I'd listen to talk radio, local AM stations that came and went with the static. You'd get fragments of preachers, weather reports, old music, sometimes even ghost stories. But that night, I found something different. It started around midnight. I was somewhere high in the hills when the station I was listening to faded out. I twisted the dial, searching for a clearer signal, and caught a faint, crackling voice. It wasn't a show or a song, just someone speaking. Very quietly, very slowly. At first I thought it was a late-night story program. Then I realized he wasn't talking to an audience. He was talking to someone specific. "You shouldn't be out there," the voice said. "I see your lights." I froze. I turned down the volume, thinking maybe I'd misheard. Static hissed for a moment, then the voice came back, softer this time. "You've been driving too long. You're tired." I stared at the radio. He couldn't be talking to me. There were hundreds of trucks out on the highways. It had to be a coincidence. Still, I felt the hair on my arms rise. I looked around, nothing but dark forest on both sides. Then the voice said, "There's a curve coming." And before I could process what I'd heard, the road ahead bent sharply to the right. A blind curve. I hit the brakes just in time to keep from sliding into the guardrail. My heart was pounding. The radio went silent. I pulled over. Sat there for a minute, shaking. The logical part of my brain said it was a coincidence and a lucky guess. But it didn't feel like that. I turned the dial again. Nothing but static. Finally, I shut it off. For the next few hours, I just drove in silence. But the feeling wouldn't leave me, like someone was still there, riding along in the dark. Around 3 a.m., snow started to fall. Heavy, thick flakes. Visibility dropped fast and I slowed down to a crawl. The road dipped between two ridges and I lost cell service. It was just me and the storm. And then, out of nowhere, the radio switched itself back on. Full volume. Static screamed through the cab, and I nearly drove off the road trying to shut it off. The knob wouldn't turn. Then, and under the static, I heard breathing. Long, steady human breathing. And beneath it, a whisper, "Don't stop." I yanked the power cord out completely. The sound cut off instantly. The snow was falling harder now, and I could barely see past the hood of the truck. I started looking for a rest stop, a diner, anything. But there was nothing, just miles of empty road. When the radio came back on the second time, it wasn't just noise. It was a man's voice again, closer now. And this time, he was whispering like he was inside the cab. "You shouldn't have unplugged me." I slammed the brakes and stopped in the middle of the road. The headlights caught the falling snow like a wall of white. And then, in that beam of light, I saw someone standing on the shoulder. No coat, no hat. Just a tall figure facing my truck. The snow wasn't even landing on him. I hit the gas and drove. I didn't care if the road twisted or if I slid off. I just needed to get away. I drove until the sky started to lighten, until I hit the outskirts of a small town with gas stations and traffic lights. I pulled into the first one I saw, shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. The radio was still unplugged. A man from the station came out, probably wondering what was wrong. He told me the road ahead had been closed all night. Avalanche cleanup. He said, "You came through that pass?" I nodded. He frowned. "Then you must have gone through alone." "There's no one up there. I replaced that truck a few months later. New model, new stereo, everything. But sometimes on long night drives, if I'm scanning through AM stations, I'll hear it again. Just for a second. That faint, crackling voice. Like he's still out there waiting for another tired driver to listen. The last time I heard it, he said something I'll never forget. "Don't look in the mirror." And I didn't, because I could already feel someone sitting in the passenger seat.
If this story stayed with you, then you already know some roads never really end. There are more true stories waiting in the dark, whispered by those who've seen what hides between the lines of the ordinary. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell before the next one finds you first. You've been listening. Now, you're part of the story too.